Who was really the first of the pharaohs? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes to life and every video plunges you into the destiny of those who shaped the world. Today, get ready to cross the veil of time and trace back to the origins of one of the greatest civilizations in history. Follow in the footsteps of Narmer, the first pharaoh, the man who is said to have united the two lands under one crown, giving birth to ancient Egypt. From the banks of the Nile to forgotten temples, his name resonates like the first heartbeat of an eternal empire. Between unification wars, sacred rites, and enigmatic symbols, his reign marks the passage from myth to history. King by blood, divine by power, he embodied order in the face of chaos. For millennia, his face engraved in stone has silently watched over us. But who was really the first of the pharaohs? But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and enjoy the journey. In the 4th millennium before Christ, major cultural transformations were taking place. By 3200 before Christ, populations were organizing across several continents, from Mesopotamia to pre-dynastic Egypt. Agriculture was developing, the first forms of writing were appearing, and exchanges were fostering the emergence of copper objects. From Iran to the Indus Valley, from the Levant to China, civilizations were forming, heralding a new era, especially in Egypt, where Narmer was about to emerge. In Mesopotamia, specifically in the region that historians call the Fertile Crescent, the Uruk period dominated around 3200 before Christ. City-states were flourishing there, concentrated around monumental temples sometimes built on platforms, the precursors of future ziggurats. Within these sanctuaries dedicated to benevolent deities like Inanna or An, resources of the city were managed, harvests were recorded, and everything was documented on clay tablets. This proto-writing, rudimentary yet revolutionary, paved the way for a new era, the era where information no longer depended solely on oral memory. Scribes, tools in hand, drew simplified symbols that represented either quantities of grain or heads of cattle. Over time, these signs became more complex, heralding cuneiform writing. To the east of Mesopotamia, on the Iranian plateau, the culture of Susa flourished. This region, sometimes called Elam, is characterized by the rise of fortified cities and the appearance of the first cylinder seals, engraved objects used to authenticate documents and goods. By 3200 before Christ, Susa was already an active urban center where cereals, oils, and pottery were stored in large collective reserves. Local artisans developed distinctive motifs, such as stylized animal figurations, carefully engraved on these seals, which were then rolled onto fresh clay to leave a unique imprint. This practice, which would become common throughout the Iranian and Mesopotamian regions, reinforced the idea of emerging administrative organization. It also reflected a desire for control and precise identification of goods, precursors to a bureaucratic system protected by religion. Southeast of the Mediterranean, in the region commonly referred to as the Levant, several Chalcolithic cities, such as Beersheba and the young Byblos, were awakening. At this time, material culture was rapidly progressing. New irrigation techniques transformed arid lands into cultivable spaces, while the exploitation of copper became widespread. Beersheba, located at the heart of the Negev desert, became a gathering point for caravans exchanging stone, obsidian, or metals. Further north, Byblos, on the Lebanese coast, was beginning its port development and was already benefiting from its maritime position. The first ships were navigating the coastline, transporting raw materials such as cedar wood and resin. In this mosaic of small communities, funerary rites and the production of ritual artifacts were also evolving, laying the foundations for a unique cultural identity. In Anatolia, the large Neolithic city of Çatalhöyük has already been abandoned for several centuries, giving way to other regional cultures such as that of Hasilar. Around 3200, Anatolian communities adopted agriculture and livestock farming for generations while continuing to develop artisanal techniques, notably painted pottery and copper metallurgy. Archaeological remains discovered in these areas show domestic structures made of mud bricks, sometimes equipped with hearths and storage spaces. Although less centralized than the great Mesopotamian cities, these Anatolian societies already demonstrate a sense of social and religious organization with the presence of figurative objects and potential sanctuaries. Ideas also circulate as trade routes connect Anatolia to neighboring regions, facilitating the exchange of materials such as obsidian, highly sought after for making sharp tools. Further north, Western Europe is distinguished by the proliferation of megaliths, particularly along the Atlantic facade. In Brittany, alignments of menhirs and dolmens dot the landscape, attesting to elaborate funerary and ritual practices. In the British Isles, the emergence of proto-Neolithic sites, featuring large earthen circles, the future henges, can be observed. These complexes, some of which foreshadow the architecture of Stonehenge, likely serve as gathering places for communities, seasonal festivals, or religious ceremonies. By 3200, the use of stone to build imposing monuments already reveals a social organization capable of mobilizing several human groups around large-scale projects. Irish passage tombs and Scottish cairns confirm this trend, showing a particular concern for rites associated with death. In the Indus Valley, Proto-Harappan communities are beginning a transition towards urbanization. At Mehrgarh, a major site occupied since the 7th millennium, the late phases, 7th Fate, observed around 3200, already herald the exceptional civilization of the Indus Valley. The inhabitants cultivate wheat and barley, raise cattle, and produce tools made of copper and stone to meet the growing needs of the population. Remains of decorated pottery, sometimes featuring geometric patterns, suggest a flourishing artistic culture. Evidence of local exchanges, notably marine shells, indicates a circulation of goods between the coast and the interior. This growing regionalization and artisanal specialization gradually prepare for the emergence of fortified cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro a few centuries later. Meanwhile, in China, the Yangshou culture reaches its peak. Known for its painted red pottery, it extends over several provinces, notably Henan and Shaanxi. Communities living along the Yellow River build circular or semi-subterranean villages where each dwelling features a central hearth. Yangshou pottery, decorated with geometric or animal motifs, reflects a high level of technical mastery. Further south, in the Yangtze Delta, the Liangzhu culture stands out for its remarkable jade work, creating sophisticated pendants and ritual objects. Around 3200, evidence of a nascent social stratification is found in these regions, with richer graves for certain individuals. These developments lay the groundwork for the future Chinese dynasties that will emerge centuries later. On the other side of the globe, in America, the Corral Soup civilization establishes the first milestones of coastal agriculture in Peru. Around 3200, the site of Corral, located in the valley of the Supe River, sees the construction of small step pyramids, circular plazas, and dwellings grouped around ceremonial centers. Archaeologists have found flutes made from pelican bones and various symbolic offerings, indicating already a structured religious life. The inhabitants of Corral Soup benefit from a rich environment. The proximity of the Pacific Ocean provides them with fish, while the fertile valley supplies cotton, squash, and legumes. Meanwhile, other regions of the Andes are starting to organize, laying the foundations for later civilizations such as Chavin, Moche, or Nazca, which will shine centuries later. In this context of global innovations, the copper revolution is felt in many regions of the world. Metal daggers and clubs are appearing, while the prestige associated with these objects fosters long-distance trade networks. Precious stones, such as turquoise from Sinai and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, circulate and emerge in trade circuits, attracting elites. Meanwhile, the Nile Valley enters its pre-dynastic phase, with two main entities organizing: Upper Egypt, centered around Nekhen, future Hierakonpolis, and Naqada III, and Lower Egypt, dominated by Bhutto and Mahdi in the Delta. Political rivalries are exacerbating, heralding the emergence of powerful leaders. But why focus on Narmer? Because he is the first sovereign whose name is remembered for having unified these two kingdoms durably, laying the foundations for 3 millennia of pharaonic civilization. Pre-dynastic Egypt, from 4000 to 3100 before Christ, consists of many independent entities called nomes, each governed by local chiefs. These communities live off agriculture, using the fertile silt deposited by the Nile's floods to grow wheat, barley, and other crops. This abundance promotes population growth and the development of more complex social structures. Chiefdoms begin to acquire symbols and ritual objects, and irrigation techniques, such as a primitive device similar to a shadoof, are implemented to improve agricultural yields. The period is divided into 3 phases, including the Naqada culture, named after an archaeological site on the west bank of the Nile. The first phase, Naqada Fishing, circa 3500 before Christ, sees villages on heights to avoid flooding. The graves, simple and dug into the sand, are accompanied by objects made of pottery and flint. The first artisanal productions appear, such as pottery and the working of native copper, while communities cultivate their identity through totemic symbols. Social hierarchy starts to emerge, with some chiefdoms taking authority over strategic territories. Naqada II, circa 3200 before Christ marks a cultural and demographic acceleration. Trade contacts multiply, especially with the Levant, as evidenced by exotic objects found in the graves. Craftsmanship diversifies, with pottery decorated with complex patterns. Social hierarchization strengthens, with richer graves and the emergence of ruling families, possibly linked to the mastery of irrigation and the control of agricultural surpluses. During Naqada II, 2 major poles of influence emerge: the south, around Nekhen, Hierakonpolis, city of the falcon, and the north, in the delta, where the bee becomes emblematic. The falcon of Horus represents southern power, and the bee represents Lower Egypt. This division, between the land of the falcon and the land of the bee, does not yet result in 2 unified kingdoms, but marks distinct political and religious traditions. In Nekhen, a prestigious chiefdom forges a sacred identity around Horus, protector of local power. The first great temples appear, dedicated to rites of fertility and cohesion. The site of Nekhen, religious capital of the south, reveals impressive remains, decorated pottery, monumental architecture, and graffiti representing clubs. These symbols are associated with the figure of the Scorpion King, a title held by several powerful chiefs. The clubs, often made of hard stone, illustrate the growing ambitions of the warrior elites in the region. During this period, the demographic rise, stimulated by agricultural techniques, is felt throughout the valley. Villages densify and expand, sometimes protected by enclosures against floods. The first written testimonies appear in Naqada III, circa 3200-3000 before Christ, with incised markings or tags representing objects, animals, or deities, marking identity or belonging. These signs are the precursors of hieroglyphic writing. This proto-writing, although rudimentary, marks a key step toward administrative and religious management. It allows for the distinction of property and the nature of goods, reinforcing the authority of local leaders capable of collecting tributes and redistributing wealth. These signs, still lacking grammatical coherence, pave the way for a system of recording resources and significant events, such as the perforated labels on jars of wine or oil used for livestock accounting. This primitive administration gradually unifies the population, reflecting the emergence of a developing state. In pre-dynastic Egypt, the desert encircles the Nile Valley, the only space suitable for life, fostering culture and human aggregation. The construction of canals and temporary dikes allows for the exploitation of silt, and the mastery of water supports the rise of artisanal crafts such as pottery, weaving, and flint, then copper working. This growth stimulates exchanges between the nomes, facilitating the circulation of know-how and cultural objects, such as specific ceramics or ritual items. The south and the north develop cultural differences, one referring to the falcon of Horus, the other to the bee, yet sporadic connections emerge, driven by commercial exchanges and the elite's quest for recognition. By the end of the Naqada Third Period, Nekhen becomes a major center in the south. New buildings, potentially linked to common rituals, are constructed there. Social distinction strengthens. Monumental tombs, sometimes enlarged to accommodate richer funerary goods, bear witness to this separation. Beads and pendants in carnelian, turquoise, or lapis lazuli, originating from distant regions, suggest the existence of trade routes to Sinai, Nubia, or even Asia. The ceremonial clubs, with complex decorations, also indicate that a ruling group seeks to legitimize its authority through symbols of power. In the north, in the Delta region, populations adapt to an environment where the branches of the Nile ramify before joining the Mediterranean. The marshy soils complicate land exploitation and population concentration. However, sites like Buto show early occupation with evidence of maritime contacts towards the Levantine coast. The inhabitants take advantage of the river network for trade, exchanging cereals, dried fish, and fishing products for minerals or artisanal goods. The bee emerges as a collective symbol, possibly linked to fertility, societal organization, or the prosperity of the delta. The last decades of Naqada III mark the transition toward a centralized state, although the process remains gradual, punctuated by rivalries between chiefdoms. Archaeological evidence, such as pottery-bearing boat tags, reveals the importance of river exchanges for trade and the circulation of ideas. These tags might herald a system of identification for goods and rising political entities. Pre-dynastic Egypt consists of agricultural chiefdoms distributed among nomes that either compete or ally. This period is marked by population growth due to improved irrigation techniques and agricultural prosperity. Totemic symbols, such as the falcon of Horus in the south and the bee in the north, shape local identities. The first signs of proto-writing indicate a need for organization to manage harvests and religious rites. The kingdom of Nekhen, with the Scorpion King, illustrates the rise of a faction from the south, marked by a nascent royal identity, supported by management and communication tools. This world, rich in beliefs linked to the land and the river, lays the foundations for the future Egypt. The transition between Naqada III and the end of the pre-dynastic period marks the emergence of a unifying royalty and a pharaonic state that will endure for 3 millennia. At this stage, the essence lies in how agricultural chiefdoms, progressively mastering water, develop proto-writing and symbols of power, thereby preparing political coordination. The relationships between the falcon of Horus and the bee, symbolizing the north-south opposition, will emerge in the attributes of the sovereign, but at this time, they remain the expression of strong and sometimes competing local identities. This cultural, spiritual, technical, and social heritage of pre-dynastic Egypt will form the basis of the pharaoh's era from the earliest dynasties. The name Narmer is shrouded in mystery, reflecting the pivotal era to which he belongs at the end of the pre-dynastic period before the first dynasty. The available sources, fragmentary and often interpretable, leave uncertainties about this sovereign, one of the oldest kings of Egypt. His birth name remains unknown, and he belongs to the dynasty Zero, a group of poorly documented rulers who likely reigned over Upper Egypt before the unification of the country. The dynasty Zero is a modern term used by Egyptologists to designate the earliest identifiable kings through archaeological remains. Among them, two figures stand out as possible predecessors of Narmer, a king identified by the sign Cow, and another named Scorpion II, due to a stylized drawing of a scorpion found on clubs at Nakon, Hierakonpolis. Some believe that Narmer might be the son or heir of one of these kings or a member of their lineage, while others think he was a local chief among many at a time when the unification of the kingdom remained uncertain. The ambiguity surrounding his identity is reinforced by later legends. According to Egyptian tradition, passed down by Manetho, the first king of unified Egypt is Menes. For a long time, historians believed that Menes was the founder of the Egyptian monarchy. However, excavations have revealed Narmer, and the question of their identities has emerged. Are Menes and Narmer the same person? Or is Menes rather King Aha, the immediate successor of Narmer? The debate continues. Some think that Menes is Narmer, while others believe that he succeeded him, or that he later symbolizes the founder of the new state. This controversy highlights the difficulty of reconciling ancient sources with archaeological discoveries. Narmer emerged in a complex political context, where his education and the religious environment played a key role. The cult of Horus, particularly influential in Upper Egypt, was central in the Nile Valley. Nakon, a major city in this region, was a place of veneration for the falcon god. At a time when Egyptian royalty was not yet based on written rules, the authority of a local chief largely depended on his connection with divine powers. Thus, the future king had to be educated very early in the sacred rites and the prerogatives of divine power. Tradition made the sovereign the earthly representative of Horus, ensuring harmony between the divine order and human society. Narmer, from his adolescence, would have received training centered on the cult of Horus. The priests of Nakon taught him the rituals and the importance of maintaining the balance between nature and society. The concept of Ma'at, difficult to translate, represents the ideal of justice, order, and harmony, ensuring the stability of the universe against chaos. Is Fiat. Ma'at was essential for ensuring the cohesion of society, the regularity of the Nile's floods, harvests, and the respect for the divine order. The young Narmer had to assimilate this concept to become a king capable of maintaining social and cosmic balance. Through mythological narratives, he understood how Horus triumphed over Seth and how the king, through symbolic acts, ensured the prosperity of the community. To govern, for Narmer, involved not only strength, but also ritual acts, symbolizing his role as guarantor of order and prosperity in a valley experiencing demographic expansion. Among the rites shaping the soul of a future pharaoh, one stands out: the annual ritual called running the course. It was a religious and symbolic trial where the prince had to run around a sacred space, likely marked by boundaries, often around Nikon or near the Temple of Horus. This run allowed the young heir to demonstrate his vitality and power before the community: priests, warriors, families, and peasants. This ritual symbolized the prince's connection to Horus, the protective god of Egypt, and marked his capacity to maintain cosmic order. According to the beliefs of the time, the strength of the king was linked to the stability of the country, and a sick king risked disturbing the balance, leading to disasters. Seeing the prince complete the run without faltering assured the community that Horus fully supported the one who would wear the royal crown. The success of the race was celebrated with festivities. People gathered to witness agricultural offerings, grains, fruits, meats, beer, and palm wine, to Horus or other deities. This event also favored political alliances, bringing together nome chiefs, merchants, and military dignitaries. All this contributed to forging the image of an ideal sovereign. Through sporting, religious, and political ceremonies, Narmer consolidated his nascent authority. He built a reputation even before ascending the throne as a man imbued with the strength of Horus, capable of protecting the community from disorder. In Egyptian mentality, this divine connection was a guarantee of legitimacy, crucial in a world where unified monarchy was not yet established. His ability to rally supporters and impose his authority in Upper Egypt partly relied on the fame gained from these demonstrations of sacred strength. This ritual race, foreshadowing the said festivals, marked time and highlighted the entry into a new year or the approach of the Nile's flood. It reinforced Narmer's image as one who, through his dynamism, renewed the divine promises of fertility. He needed to inspire trust and respect, mastering both political adversities and natural challenges. Narmer's education also included learning the command techniques necessary for a future leader. He drew inspiration from earlier kings like Kai or Scorpion II, whose tombs suggest a rudimentary administration and codified funerary practices. To ensure a solid chieftaincy, Narmer had to understand the management of agricultural surpluses, the redistribution of resources, and maintain economic balance by avoiding famines. His authority was also consolidated through the management of reserves, the regulation of internal conflicts, and the arbitration of tribal rivalries. Ma'at, a fundamental principle of royalty, was to be embodied by the prince, the guarantor of security and prosperity. Strength tests, such as running the track, were a means to prove his vigor, which was crucial for the populations of Upper Egypt, especially those of Nekhen, who expected their leader to be not only an heir, but also an intermediary between the gods and men. He had to maintain cohesion in the face of external threats, internal wars, and climatic challenges. Narmer was tasked with preserving this sacred cycle. This context also explains why legendary accounts describe Menes, sometimes identified with Narmer, as a civilizing hero. Ancient chronicles constructed the image of an ideal founder, a bearer of peace for the two lands. Later, Manetho would attribute the unification of Egypt to Menes, possibly drawing on oral or written traditions about Narmer. Archaeologists, seeking to differentiate legend from historical reality, analyze remains such as pottery, jar seals, or votive objects to learn more about this era. The absence of continuous sources makes interpretation difficult, but the discoveries fuel the discussion on the identity of Narmer and other legendary figures like Ka or Scorpion II. Narmer thus appears as a prince in training, legitimized by the heritage of semi-legendary leaders and his religious commitment, particularly in the worship of Horus. This combination explains why ancient authors, such as Manetho, merged these figures into a single name, Mines, and why Narmer, active at the end of this era, became a cornerstone of the founding narrative. What is certain is that Narmer inherits a lineage in search of unification, and his education reflects the centralization of royal power. The anecdote of the ritual of running the track in Nakan, aimed at proclaiming the vitality of the prince, illustrates the climate of the time, a changing society where the competition among local leaders and the necessity to federate the populations under a religious framework intertwined. These athletic ritual performances are often seen as the ancestors of ceremonies, periodically reaffirming the legitimacy of the king god. When the Egyptians attribute to Narmer, or Menes, the title of the first sovereign unifying the Nile Valley, they extended this logic. The leader had to be both a great organizer and a sacred athlete, guarantor of cosmic order. From a young age, Narmer was trained in the pre-dynastic tradition, mastering religion, rudimentary astronomy to predict the floods, and showing skills in leadership, negotiation, and embodying the continuity of the Dynasty Zero. His physical strength and endurance, proven during ritual races, his learning of the rites of Horus, and his understanding of Ma'at destined him to play a structuring role. Narmer will embody the king, the first sovereign of Upper Egypt, before undertaking greater enterprises. Thus, the youth of Narmer unfolds, a key figure of the new era. The confusions with Menes and the uncertainties surrounding his links with Ka, or Scorpion Zi-Tekund, highlight the complex memory of the origins of the Egyptian kingdom, a tangle of heroic, cultic, political, and administrative narratives, of which Narmer is the heir. Guided by the ritual of Nakan, instructed in the worship of Horus, and guardian of Ma'at, he will cross a decisive threshold, inscribing his name in the history of Egypt and the ancient world. Around 3200 before Christ, Upper Egypt was fragmented among several local powers seeking to control the fertile lands along the Nile. Two main cities emerged, Nekhen in the south and This in the north, near Abydos. The floodplains of the Nile favored prosperous agriculture, with cereals, vegetables, and cattle farming. Communities established granaries and irrigation systems to channel water from annual floods. Each city fortified its defenses against raids, sometimes with brick or palisade walls. This period, called the pre-dynastic, was characterized by chiefdoms that wove alliances or conflicts to increase their power. It is in this context that Narmer, leader of the region of Nekhen, emerges. An ambitious young leader, he seeks to rally numerous supporters. His prestige rests on his lineage, possibly linked to figures like King Scorpion II. Noble families observe his ability to unite or ease tensions between clans. Conflicts are fueled by the desire to control trade routes, linking the gold-rich south and exotic products with the north in contact with future Lower Egypt and the Mediterranean. Accessing linen, ornamental stone, and irrigated lands requires solid military and diplomatic support. Nekhen is not the only one aiming for dominance in Upper Egypt. This, near Abydos, is another power center. The two cities sometimes confront each other through intermediaries, causing sporadic clashes. Local elites seek to increase their wealth by erecting temples dedicated to local deities, like Horus in Nekhen, or accumulating agricultural resources. In this climate of uncertainty, Narmer stands out as a unifier capable of transcending urban influence to dominate politics in Upper Egypt. solidify his rise, Narmer must not only defeat his rivals, but also secure strong alliances. Marital strategies play a key role, and chroniclers mention a princess, Neith-hotep, from the Delta. Although the existence of this marriage remains uncertain, such a union between Upper Egypt and the Delta seems plausible. This link symbolizes the pacification between the two regions and allows Narmer to assert divine support, thus facilitating expansion northward. At the same time, Narmer modernizes the army. While warriors had long used wooden or stone clubs, he introduces more compact and effective weapons with chipped stone heads. This enhancement increases the impact of strikes. The wicker shield also appears light and maneuverable, offering protection while facilitating movement. This evolution gives Narmer's army a tactical advantage over less well-equipped enemies. Tensions between Nekhen and this focus on a common enemy, the cities of the Delta, rich in resources. This conflict leads to the Battle of the 10 Plows, a major confrontation reported by archaeological remains. The sources of the time do not detail the event, but fragments of pottery and representations suggest a great battle against the forces of the Delta. The term 10 Plows could refer to a number of groups or districts involved. The strategic position of Tel El Farka, between the south of the valley and the lower part of the river, is key to controlling trade. During the battle, Narmer takes advantage of the mobility and superiority of his troops. The stone-headed clubs break the enemy lines, while the shields effectively protect against projectiles. The Delta troops, accustomed to marshy terrain, are caught off guard by the cohesion of Narmer's forces. The outcome is a decisive victory for Narmer and his allies. This military victory enhances the reputation of the ruler of Nekhen, who now presents himself as a liberator or legitimate conqueror in the eyes of the populations of Upper Egypt. The clans more readily recognize his authority, whether they are local families or village chiefs. Narmer takes advantage of this momentum to strengthen the administrative and economic structures necessary for managing an expanding territory. Managing harvests, organizing labor for irrigation canals, mobilizing troops, or collecting tributes require an emerging bureaucratic organization. Previous leaders had already used rudimentary accounting techniques, but under Narmer, they take on a new scope. Ivory tags found at Abydos testify to the desire to standardize and unify census methods. These pieces, sometimes considered a proto-writing or a codified system, were attached to bags of grain, jars of oil, or bales of linen, identifying the content, provenance, and recipient. The ivory, coming from elephants in Nubia or the eastern deserts, emphasizes the value placed on marking supports. These labels embody the beginnings of pharaonic administration, allowing for data centralization and laying the foundations for a state structure capable of supporting Narmer's political expansion. The administrative development is reflected in the construction of larger buildings around Abydos and Nekhen, intended to house scribes and store archives. Although sun-dried bricks are still common, some stone foundations are appearing in key areas to ensure the longevity of the bureaucratic space. The officials, trained by priests or notables, use trimmed reeds to trace symbols on pottery shards or chips of limestone. Although the writing system is not yet fully developed, the desire to distinguish, classify, and record demonstrates a long-term vision, characteristic of a leader seeking to reinforce the cohesion of the kingdom. Meanwhile, Narmer's reputation continues to grow in Upper Egypt. The elites of this and Abydos, long hesitant, eventually come to terms with the influence of Nekhen. Some choose alliance, hoping to retain their privileges. Others are silenced after the display of strength at Tel El Farka and other skirmishes. Marital alliances, such as that with Ninth-hotep, strengthen the gradual unification rather than a mosaic of independent territories. On a symbolic level, Narmer cultivates his image by associating himself with the cult of Horus, the tutelary deity of Nekhen. Representations show the falcon above a serek, symbolizing his divine investiture. Little by little, he becomes the living embodiment of divine authority, a message reinforced by ceremonies and rites. The presence of ceremonial clubs and decorated shields underscores that his power rests not only on divine approval, but also on the military strength he has reformed. The recognition of Narmer as the dominant leader encourages neighboring regions to follow political developments. Trade caravans from eastern lands, such as future Palestine or the confines of the Levant, start circulating more frequently. Merchants exchange agricultural products, local stone, hides, and introduce foreign ceramics as well as technologies. This effervescence shows that the political stability established by Narmer is beneficial for trade. The emergence of a centralized administration also allows for the collection of taxes and tributes on goods, thereby strengthening the monarch's means of action. After the Battle of the Ten Plows, the threat of a counter-offensive from the Delta diminishes, as the northern clans recognize Narmer's military strength. However, he needs a stable capital and reliable local intermediaries. While remaining attached to Nekhen, he also establishes strongholds at Abydos and elsewhere in the valley. The scribes, responsible for managing records, inventories, and taxes, play an essential role. A network forms, linking villages and city-states, relying on well-ordered flows to maintain the favor of the Lord of Nekhen. The ivories excavated at Abydos, possibly bearing Narmer's insignia and hieroglyphic symbols, are the manifestation of bureaucratic power. Each controlled label is a step toward centralization, allowing for tracking of livestock, grains, and raw materials. The progress is slow and uneven, but the desire to organize and account is taking root among the notables. Without this administrative foundation, military conquests would be futile. A management machine is needed to ensure lasting victory, collect resources, and unify rituals. In Upper Egypt, Narmer's rise to power translates into profound changes. A better-equipped army, refined administration with ivory tags, and an emerging proto-hieroglyphic writing, marital alliances facilitating peace with the north, and military victories consolidating his prestige. Narmer thus embodies a charismatic figure capable of transcending tribal divisions and creating unity, asserting himself as a major leader in the proto-dynastic history of Egypt. This era sees the emergence of a leader who, through alliance, military reform, and administrative innovation, sets Upper Egypt on the path to centralization. The victory at the Battle of the Ten Plows at Tel El Farka provides Narmer with the legitimacy needed to take control of the region. The establishment of a scribal administration, documented by fragments and ivory labels at Abydos, lays the groundwork for an organized state. Upper Egypt then enters a new era, marked by the consolidation of a leader capable of harmonizing practices and asserting his authority. This southern territory, now structured, could well turn toward the north to unify the land of the Nile. However, the supremacy acquired in the south remains the crucial step that allows Narmer to impose himself as the undisputed leader. His rivalries with other power centers persist, but his renown now places him at the center of the political stage. He just needs to transform this regional authority into a broader project that will mark pharaonic history for centuries. At the beginning of the 32nd century before Christ, Egypt was divided between Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. Narmer, an ambitious sovereign, sought to unify these two entities. The Narmer Palette, discovered in 1898 at Hierakonpolis, symbolizes this unification. This schist tablet, 64 centimeters tall, engraved on both sides, embodies the unification and the birth of the pharaonic state. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt and wields a mace against a kneeling enemy. A servant carries his sandals, emphasizing the sacredness of the moment. Several decapitated bodies lie at his feet, representing the violence of conquest. Behind him, the god Horus, symbolizing Lower Egypt, watches over the conquered territory, thereby legitimizing his power. On the other side, Narmer wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, signifying double domination. He is followed by a solemn procession, with standards bearing deities, including Wepwawet, symbol of conquest. Servants demonstrate their allegiance, signifying submission to the pharaoh. Two intertwined felines around a circle symbolize the fusion of the two kingdoms, united under the same ruler. In this iconography, the ceremony of tying the two lands is evoked. The fusion of the white, Hedjet, and red, Deshret, crowns to form the Shent. The accounts mention the term Z Atef Hedjet plus Deshret, designating the solemn act by which the sovereign takes total control of the Nile Valley. This symbol of unified royalty is at the heart of Narmer's political program. He does not merely militarily subjugate Lower Egypt, but legitimizes his conquest through sacred rites, ensuring the support of the gods. This ritual is fundamental. In his desire to unify the Nile Valley, Narmer orders the construction of the White Wall to the north, which likely marks the first core of Memphis, the future capital. Strategically located between Upper and Lower Egypt, the city controlled human and economic flows while protecting against enemy incursions. Recognizing the importance of this area, Narmer erected defenses to assert his sovereignty and organize military logistics. This project was innovative. Mennefer, the name later given to this city, would become a stronghold. Its geographic position between the Delta and Upper Egypt facilitated the circulation of agricultural goods and manufactured products. Memphis also played a crucial diplomatic role, serving as a stopover for embassies from the Levant or Nubia. Through this establishment, Narmer prepared for the centralization of administration, essential for consolidating royal authority. The creation of this city embodies the culmination of unification and the birth of a unified and sustainable governance. Narmer's influence extended beyond Sinai, as evidenced by the discovery of flint engraved with his name in Canaan. These objects, resulting from trade exchanges between Egypt and the Levant, asserted Egyptian sovereignty over communication routes. The engraving of the royal name on these tools symbolized control over supply routes, thereby reinforcing the pharaoh's prestige. This symbolic and material practice emphasized Egyptian authority among local populations, reminding them of the power of a distant sovereign. It foreshadowed the role of pharaohs in the Syro-Palestinian region, where their future campaigns would draw inspiration from Narmer's policy. Through these marks, Narmer asserted the strength of a central power capable of influencing territories well beyond the Nile Valley. The Narmer Palette, dated around 3100 to 3000 before Christ, glorifies his victories, although unification was probably gradual. It presents his campaigns as a sudden triumph, even though hegemony over Lower Egypt resulted from several battles and alliances. This visual propaganda, with the king brandishing his mace and accompanied by gods, made a lasting impression and consolidated his image as monarch ruling over the united two lands. The choice to depict defeated enemies underscores the use of terror to reinforce obedience. In ancient Egypt, this type of scene on statues and reliefs became a recurring symbol. The pharaoh always triumphs over the forces of chaos. Decapitations, the exhibition of mutilated bodies, and divine presence illustrate the fate reserved for those who challenge royal authority. The king's monumentality, depicted as larger than his subjects, symbolizes the cosmic hierarchy in which the sovereign is the intermediary between men and the gods. Narmer occupies a special place in this system. The Narmer Palette embodies the convergence of several ambitions: to conquer, to unify, and to proclaim a nearly divine power. It narrates a period of significant upheaval, marking the birth of a durable pharaonic civilization. Far more than a mere cosmetic object, it illustrates the emergence of a royal ideology based on legitimacy through force and divine support. This foundational document would influence future colossal statuary, sanctuaries, and rituals, marking the beginning of a centralized political system whose impact remains undeniable. This fifth part of the Narmer saga highlights the founding act of Egyptian unification. The construction of the White Wall and the creation of Memphis herald a strategic decision-making center. The scenes of massacre and divine processions on the palette confirm the absolute power of the sovereign, supported by the gods and his army. The episode in Canaan, with the engraved flints, demonstrates the geopolitical scope of his reign. Through these images, Narmer establishes unified Egypt, a monumental legacy. Under his impetus, Egypt adopts a lasting political cohesion for 3 millennia. Narmer remains the figure embodying the initial impulse of a unifying monarchy. When Narmer's court was established, Egypt underwent a profound reorganization of power. The decisions made during this time would lay the foundations of a durable political system. The organization of the double crown is not merely an extension of military campaigns or dynastic unions, but also an administrative and religious construct that would shape the future of the kingdom. The double crown symbolizes the fusion of Upper Egypt to the south and Lower Egypt in the Nile Delta. Through this unification, Narmer initiated a revolution in pharaonic history, visible through the introduction of the royal title, the choice of dual capitals, the creation of official emblems, the first census of cattle, and the establishment of a trade network. At the heart of every monarchy lies a title, a formulation that enables the identification of the sovereign and legitimizes their authority. In the case of Narmer, the most notable innovation consists of associating the two founding symbols of unified Egypt, the reed, representative of Upper Egypt, and the bee, a recurring emblem of Lower Egypt. It is from this conjunction that the title NSW is born. In ancient Egyptian, NSW refers to the concept of sovereignty pertaining to the south, while Baiti underscores allegiance to the northern region, rich in agricultural resources and strongly connected to maritime routes to the Mediterranean. Thus, the king proclaims himself he of the reed and the bee, displaying his authority over the entire territory and presenting himself as the guarantor of its integrity. For a modern audience, this may seem like a purely semantic detail, but in ancient Egypt, names held a nearly magical power. Each title emphasized a state of cosmic balance. By calling himself NSU Baiti, Narmer committed to maintaining Ma'at, that is, the order of the world. Beyond the political assertion, the adoption of this new royal name paved the way for a millennia-old tradition, since all the pharaohs who would follow him would take up, in various forms, this dual belonging symbolically linking the south and the north. If the king's title already referred to the notion of unification, the organization of the territory would concretize this duality. Narmer, aware of the strategic importance of the delta, would have decided to strengthen a settlement at the site of the White Walls, a location destined to become Memphis, while the Abydos region, the traditional cradle of royalty, remained anchored in a religious and dynastic role. For today's audience, it is essential to understand that shifting power northward did not equate to abandoning the south. On the contrary, this tactical choice aimed to manage administrative affairs from a control point closer to maritime trade routes and the Mediterranean basin, while retaining the ritual prestige associated with the original sanctuaries located in Upper Egypt. Memphis, situated at the crossroads of the delta and the valley, enjoyed a pivotal position. It was the necessary passage to control the flows of goods transiting along the river, whether it concerned grains, cattle, or luxury products. Although the precise topography of the site around 3200 remains partly speculative, it is known that a fortification wall, sometimes referred to as the White Wall, marked the emergence of this agglomeration as a new administrative center. Scribes and officials oversaw the distribution of resources there, while temples began to institutionalize royal worship. In parallel, Abydos remained crucial for the celebration of funerary rites and the memory of royal ancestors. Kings, including Narmer, bolstered by the religious authority granted to them by Upper Egypt, ensured that these sacred ties were preserved. Abydos, with its necropolises, crystallized the belief that the dynasty was invested by the gods, while playing a discreet yet powerful role in legitimizing power. Thus, between these two poles, the physical and spiritual map of unified Egypt was emerging. Administration drew its vigor from the north, while the south retained its sacred breath. Another major contribution of this period lies in the appearance of the Sarek, a visual element that would become the royal signature for centuries. The Sarek presents itself as a stylized, vertical frame representing the facade of the palace. Above this structure typically perches a falcon, bearing the attributes of the god Horus. Together, they form the precursor to the cartouche, inside of which the name of the king is written. The exact origin of the Sarek is linked to the desire to centralize power. Marking the name of the sovereign on walls, objects, or official documents was a way to disseminate his authority throughout the land. Its appearance, derived from palatial architecture, symbolized the solidity of the kingdom, while Horus, the celestial god, placed the sovereign in a divine perspective. Granaries, jars, clay tablets, and ivory labels were carefully sealed or marked with the Sarek to indicate that these goods were royal property or subject to a tax equal to the king's right. Fragments of these archaeological supports have been found from Upper Egypt to the edges of the delta, attesting to the widespread circulation of Narmer's authority. It is important to emphasize the considerable influence that this framework would have. Later, under the first dynasties and well beyond, pharaohs would perpetuate this imagery. The inscription of the name inside the Sarek became a political and sacred act. It was not just about labeling an object, but reaffirming the intimate link between royal function and divinity. The Egyptians saw the palace as a microcosm, a reflection of divine creation, and each facade, each door, had spiritual significance. By placing the falcon of Horus next to the representation of the palatial building, the sovereign established a lasting visual code, understandable both for the scribal elites and for the population subjected to common symbols. Territorial unification cannot be sustained without establishing mechanisms to manage resources. In Narmer's administration, the counting of livestock represents a crucial advance, often referred to as the Year of Counting. Later Egyptian sources show that this event would be commemorated regularly at the beginning of each reign, or sometimes every 2 years. The original idea was to delineate the land and agricultural wealth of the country, particularly the livestock, to determine the tax that should return to the court. For a modern audience, this aspect may seem technical, but it is a decisive milestone. Without a record, it is impossible to establish or justify the necessary levies for the functioning of the kingdom. At the dawn of the dynastic period, Egypt was based on an essentially agricultural economy. Livestock, cattle, goats, sheep, was a valuable resource for feeding the population, supplying the army, developing trade, and supporting large construction projects. With the livestock census, we witnessed the implementation of a first centralized taxation. Scribes, trained in the rudiments of proto-writing, record the number of heads in each province. Pastoral activities, seasonal transhumance along the Nile, as well as small farms, are then integrated into a larger system where each livestock holder must account for their wealth. Beyond the fiscal purpose, this census has a political function, validating the sovereign's reach into the remote areas of the delta or the far southern fringes. The Year of Counting becomes a motif of unity, an opportunity to highlight Narmer's sovereignty. In later documents, this practice will continue, attesting to the key role of the census in shaping Egyptian identity. A people united around a central power, administered according to standardized methods, and gathered by the same crown. Beyond internal administration, the early Egypt of Narmer actively seeks to radiate along the trade routes of the Near East. Archaeological discoveries show the existence of deposits of ivory and oil that transited from the more southern African regions or from the distant Horn of Africa before being redistributed to the Levant and even further. The jars found are sometimes marked with a serif bearing Narmer's name, which attests to the royal will to control and shape commercial flows. Ivory, particularly prized, often came from elephants and, to a lesser extent, from hippopotamus tusks. This white gold of antiquity was used to make jewelry, ceremonial knife handles, and decorative pieces for court furniture. Oil, on the other hand, came in several types: sesame, flax, or even olives, sometimes transported from the Levantine coast. The Egyptians redirected certain products to other lands by taking advantage of the Nile as a major river route and the Delta as a maritime interface to the eastern Mediterranean. This activity was not limited to an exchange of goods. It also established informal diplomacy, creating mutual dependence with merchants and trade enclaves in neighboring regions. Several excavation sites suggest the presence of trading posts or storage stations controlled by the royal administration. Broken jars bearing seal marks testify to the reception, redistribution, and taxation of goods. A revealing example lies in certain inscriptions on pottery, where the name Narmer appears alongside notations indicating the origin or quantity of the product. These material traces confirm that the central power had already understood the strategic importance of an economy driven by the export and import of raw materials and processed products. The beginnings of dynastic Egypt are thus not confined to an idyllic isolation along the river. Even at this time, the early signs of a state with commercial and diplomatic ambitions are emerging. seeking to consolidate its economy through ivory, rare oils, precious woods, and fine stones. This prosperity was intimately linked to the prestige of the sovereign. Controlling transport routes, setting tariffs, imposing official seals, all of this enhanced the aura of Narmer, master of two kingdoms and guardian of a commercial crossroads. The organization of the double crown goes beyond military framework and the acquisition of power through force. Narmer innovates by establishing a royal title, NSW Baidi, highlighting the idea of a king as the guarantor of two distinct worlds. He also creates a structure with two centers of power, Memphis for administration and the Delta, Thinis, Abydos, for religiosity and ancestral remembrance. This functional division will endure, though its evolution will vary with the dynasties. The creation of the Sarek, where the king's name is inscribed under the protection of the Falcon of Horus, formalizes royal propaganda, establishing the sovereign as the divine protector of the people. The mention of the year of counting introduces a system of economic and social control, which will become a ritual practice for every pharaoh, allowing for measuring the country's wealth and showcasing the continuity of governance. Finally, the network of deposits, trade routes, and marked jars demonstrates the desire to expand the influence of Egypt through exchanges and the circulation of precious goods. It is fascinating to observe that the innovations of Narmer's reign, such as the adoption of the dual title, the establishment of multipolar political centers, the use of the Sarek, tax collection, and the rise of international trade, will persist until the Greco-Roman era. The concept of the king as master of Upper and Lower Egypt, inscribed in the formula Nens Baidi, will survive through over 30 dynasties. The successive capitals, whether in Memphis, Pyramus, or Thebes, will follow this dualistic model, reconciling administration and religious continuity. The kings will retain the Sarek before adopting cartouches, but the idea of inscribing their names within a frame, exalted by the sacred aspect of power, will endure. The year of counting will become a tradition, often associated with Jubilee celebrations, allowing kings to maintain social cohesion and strengthen the link between the central power and farmers. As for the international dimension, it will develop with trade expeditions to Nubia, the Levantine coast, and the Near East, attesting to the vitality of the system through jars and royal seals. This chapter on the organization of the double crown marks a major turning point. The Egyptian monarchy unfolds in its political, spiritual, economic, and international dimensions. Narmer, both conqueror and unifier, plays a key role by instituting the title NSW Baidi, symbolizing the unity of Egypt. He organizes complementary power centers to address territorial imperatives while sealing the alliance between the south and the north. With the Sarek, he inscribes his royal function onto a durable visual support. He also creates a taxation mechanism with the first census of livestock, thus supporting the kingdom's expansion. His early commercial actions reinforce Egypt's image as an external power, rival or partner to neighboring regions. This approach is distinguished by its modernity, establishment of norms, definition of decision-making centers, appropriation of religious emblems, and implementation of a national taxation system. A foundational act that structures the Egyptian state and allows the dynasty to endure for 3,000 years, facing prosperity and troubles, but always faithful to the idea of a king unifying the two lands. The organization of the double crown under Narmer inaugurates a new era marked by the foundations of state administration, royal worship, and Egyptian diplomacy. The adoption of the title NSW Baidi the establishment of two capitals, the creation of the Sarek, the year of counting, and the rise of trade routes illustrate the desire to create a unified kingdom. Narmer reunites a fragmented country under a sovereign who masters military power, organization, and innovation. Few civilizations have crossed the threshold from proto-history to establish the centralization of power. Egypt achieves this due to geographical, economic, and cultural factors, but above all, thanks to an audacious king who lays the foundations of a sustainable state. This step establishes the pharaonic Egypt as it will be known, with its rites, sacred monarchies, and official inscriptions. This is not a mere historical detail, but the birth of the idea of a unique sovereign invested by the gods to govern two shores, two lands, two worlds under one crown. When Narmer becomes master of the two lands around 3100 before Christ, Egypt undergoes a political, artistic, and spiritual transformation. The sovereign does not rule alone, but relies on an elite of administrators, religious figures, and military leaders, as well as on his royal family. In this context, queens play a key role, as do the developments in the worship of the gods. To reign over Egypt requires a balance between demonstrating earthly power and honoring the divinities. Under Narmer, this tension rapidly evolves, establishing a tradition that will last for millennia. A central element in this reorganization is Neith-hotep, often considered the first queen to possess a monumental tomb, a mastaba. This type of tomb, with its rectangular and sloping shape, symbolizes the newfound attention given to the queen. Her mastaba, located near Giza, illustrates the exceptional recognition of the queen. Until then, it was unclear whether royal wives enjoyed such prestigious funerary monuments. By granting such a monument to Neith-hotep, Narmer inscribes his dynasty into a spiritual and social continuity. Not only must the king ensure his survival in the afterlife, but the queen must also have a sacred place, ensuring her eternal fame. Neith-hotep holds crucial importance for historians. Her name associates the goddess Neith, venerated in the Delta, with the word hotep, meaning satisfaction or peace. This association seeks to anchor the dynasty under the protection of a tutelary goddess, believed to oversee birth and combat. Although her lineage is debated, some consider her the wife of Narmer, while others view her as a princess from the Delta married to another ruler to seal a political alliance. In any case, her mastaba indicates a recognition equal to that of the pharaoh in the funerary sphere, marking subsequent dynasties that will honor queens and royal mothers with specific monuments, highlighting their influence on the continuity of the monarchy. The unification of Egypt under Narmer poses the challenge of reconciling local cults. Upper Egypt venerates Horus, while Lower Egypt honors Seth, the storm god and protector of the north. Before Narmer, these cults caused rivalries and tensions. To appease the situation, Narmer incorporates Seth into the official pantheon without diminishing Horus's importance. He constructs sanctuaries dedicated to Seth and Horus, particularly at the borders between the two regions, and assigns priests to oversee the offerings. This demonstrates that Narmer is the guardian of the prosperity of the whole country, honoring the deities of the north and the south. Despite the integration of Seth, the mythical rivalry between Horus and Seth will persist in Egyptian religion. The major religious festivals evolve under Narmer, particularly the Sed festival, which has its roots in the First Dynasty. This festival, intended to revitalize royal power, symbolized the vigor of the pharaoh and his connection with the gods. Initially more modest, it included official races, offerings to the gods, and the wearing of crowns to signify control over Upper and Lower Egypt. Another festive expression related to the fertility and power of the land is the ritual dance of the bull Apis, attested since the Archaic period. This sacred bull, honored in Memphis, represents the creative strength of Ptah, the craftsman god. The king may participate to pay homage to Apis, a symbol of vigor and fertility. The participants, probably accompanied by percussion, traverse sacred enclosures. Although the cult of Apis is embryonic under Narmer, it will grow in the following dynasties, illustrating the will to honor the sources of Egyptian prosperity. This religious effervescence is also reflected in artistic production, particularly objects dedicated to palace rituals. The workshops of the time create symbolic, utilitarian, and sacred objects. A major innovation is the use of stone palettes, schist or siltstone, initially for grinding cosmetic pigments. These palettes, decorated with animal or mythical motifs, enhance their ceremonial function. Under Narmer, the royal workshop at Saqqara stands out for the finesse of its productions, notably palettes adorned with religious scenes or symbols of power. Beyond their practical use, they become instruments of propaganda, showcasing royal supremacy and the divine connection of the monarch. Meanwhile, the working of precious metals develops to highlight royal prestige. Electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, is particularly prized for its solar glow, symbolizing a divine radiance. At Saqqara, complex jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, pectorals, is created not only for the women of the court, but also for princes, dignitaries, and priests. These objects may be offered during religious ceremonies. The representations of jewelry on the walls of tombs underscore the importance of mining wealth and trade in Egypt. Offering these jewels to the deities, or placing them in tombs, reflects the belief that material splendor signifies favor from the gods. Life at court, between innovations and traditions, includes significant events. Among them, a banquet is said to have established the royal ration of dated beer. Produced in breweries near grain granaries, beer is a staple food in ancient Egypt, often given as wages to workers on royal construction sites. Under Narmer, the distribution becomes official, with scribes recording the quantity and production date. Legend has it that during a grand feast, Narmer required each jar of beer to be stamped with a seal indicating the date and a quality symbol, an administrative act consolidating his authority over food resources, essential to the birth of the Egyptian state. This episode illustrates the transformation of administration at the beginning of the First Dynasty, with a desire to control the flow of goods and ensure traceability. This system, akin to a primitive tax system, binds the court around a symbol of abundance granted by the king. Beer, beyond its nutritional function, is sacred and is part of offerings to the gods, making its management essential for ensuring the stocks of the temples. This anecdote from the royal banquet illustrates well the atmosphere at Narmer's court. While political unification and religious rights are at the forefront, daily life sees the emergence of new social practices. Scribes, once limited to labeling jars or ivory tags, become more influential. The accounts and records of agricultural goods such as cereals, livestock, or beer become matters of power. These recordings will serve to establish taxes and organize provisions for royal projects or religious festivals. Even a simple beer vessel symbolizes the state's evolution. At the same time, the court is not isolated. Precious metals, cedarwood, fragrant oils, and ivory from abroad nourish the nobility with luxury goods. Offerings to Apis or Horus grow in scale, accompanied by musicians, dancers, and entire troops during official banquets. Although the sparse archives from that time do not reveal all the details, certain pre-dynastic tombs show objects evoking the importance of festivities. Fine ceramic cups, figurines linked to sacred dance, and inscriptions mentioning musical troops are found in royal burials. Under Narmer's reign, a royal banquet thus becomes an act of power, divine celebration, and courtly solidarity. This balance between worship, power, and daily life at court forms the essence of the pharaonic function. Under Narmer, royal legitimacy is built in religious, administrative, and protocol domains. The innovations mentioned, the mastaba of Neithotep, the integration of Seth alongside Horus, the outline of the said festival, the bull dance of Apis, the creation of ritual palettes, the making of electrum jewelry, and the royal beer ration, testify to a rapid change. These evolutions deeply impact Egyptian society, influencing future rulers. The reign of the first unifying pharaoh sees the birth of practices that will become characteristic of Egyptian civilization: the splendor of ceremonies, the use of precious metals, and the centralization of administration, even for goods like beer. These elements form a coherent whole, where each aspect of public and private life is linked to the royal function and the will of the gods. Thus, the chapter on court life and religion under Narmer is not limited to anecdotes. It paves the way for the monumentalization of cults, the rise of the scribe elite, and the establishment of grand rituals that will found the pharaonic identity for over 3 millennia. Narmer's reign goes beyond the political harmonization of the two lands. It develops diplomacy and expansion to consolidate its power. Egypt seeks alliances, secures trade routes, and conducts campaigns to obtain vital resources. Narmer projects his influence not only to source precious goods, but also to assert his status as an emerging power. One of the areas where Narmer projects his influence is the Sinai Peninsula. Located to the northeast of what will become the heart of the Egyptian Empire, this mountainous and desert region draws attention for one major reason: the extraction of turquoise. This ornamental stone, with its characteristic blue-green color, is particularly valued for making jewelry and ritual objects. Archaeological sources suggest that expeditions to the Sinai were already being planned during Narmer's time to early assume the role of a mining power. Among the most notable sites is Serabit el-Kadem, a turquoise deposit that will be regularly exploited over the centuries. At first glance, one might wonder why a king from the Delta and the Nile Valley would be so interested in such an inhospitable place, battered by winds, inhabited mainly by nomadic local tribes. The answer is simple. Turquoise, regarded as a prestigious commodity, not only adorns the elite's ornaments, but also becomes a symbol of status for the Egyptian court. Its appropriation by Narmer demonstrates his desire to assert his sovereignty over distant lands, and to prove, through sometimes perilous expeditions, the resilience and determination of his nascent administration. Rock engravings and a few fragmentary inscriptions suggest that the Egyptian presence is formalizing through the establishment of roads, supply points, and rudimentary garrisons. Thus, an embryonic control is exerted over local populations, helping to prevent attacks by bandits and ensuring the return of the precious mineral to the Nile Valley. In parallel, Narmer also directs his attention to the south, to a region that the ancient Egyptians will call Nubia. Over the millennia, this area harbors immense riches, including gold, ivory, and semi-precious stones. For the period in question, Nubia is also the great reservoir of incense, exotic woods, and precious hides. The relations between pre-dynastic Egypt and Nubia are not limited to commercial exchanges. They also have a military dimension. According to several archaeological clues, outposts may have been established in strategic areas to monitor caravan routes. Among these establishments, the site of Kustul in Lower Nubia provides interesting remains. Objects found there indicate the presence of a local elite, partially influenced by Egyptian culture, suggesting reciprocal contacts. At this stage, Narmer and his entourage understand the importance of asserting a political presence in the region. The goal is twofold: to prevent hostile incursions from the south on the one hand, and to ensure secure access to luxury products on the other. The elephant ivory, as well as the incense, makes a significant impression in the Egyptian court. They feed both religious rituals and the sumptuous decoration of palaces, confirming the preeminence of pharaonic power. By controlling these goods, Narmer consolidates his aura. He offers his followers rare gifts and, in the same process, reinforces his authority. To further enrich the palette of its exchanges, there are noted contacts with a territory that later Egyptian texts will refer to as Punt. Specialists locate this land of Punt in present-day Somalia or along the coasts of the Horn of Africa, although the exact location remains a subject of debate. During the time of Narmer, what is called Early Punt is primarily synonymous with exotic goods. Ebony, leopard skins, fragrant resins, and other products from savannas and tropical forests are mentioned. For an evolving Egypt, these raw materials are precious, both from a religious and aesthetic standpoint. Ebonies, with their deep black and very dense appearance, are, for example, prized for the manufacture of prestige furniture and small sculptures intended for cults. Leopard skins, on the other hand, can be worn by priests during sacred ceremonies, symbolizing strength and protection. Engaging in trade with Punt therefore involves long caravans, or even rudimentary maritime expeditions, if one assumes the use of riverboats descending the Nile before skirting the shores of the Red Sea. Even though direct sources are scarce for this ancient period, the later pharaonic tradition will echo this and draw from the idea that Egyptians and inhabitants of Punt share ancient diplomatic relations, combining barter and the mutual offering of tributes. In this context, each arrival of goods from Punt at the quays or in the warehouses of the kingdom further solidifies Narmer's reputation as a leader capable of maintaining ties beyond the deserts that encircle his country. Narmer does not stop there. His ambitions for expansion in the Near East are evident in the establishment of what could be described as tributary relationships. The Levant, this vast coastal region that includes present-day Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and Syria, has long been appreciated for its natural resources. Olive oil and wine, typical products of these regions, are highly sought after by the Egyptian elite, who see a certain culinary and cultic refinement in them. Moreover, cedar wood, harvested from the mountainous massifs of Lebanon, is a key asset for boat construction, carpentry, and architectural decorations. Later, frescoes and texts from the dynastic period will often recount how much Lebanese cedar, hard and fragrant, is valued in Egypt. During the time of Narmer, establishing reliable trade routes is therefore essential so that caravans of goods can travel from the Levantine coast to the borders of the delta, often traversing areas fraught with pitfalls. The stele walls, erected to commemorate the submission or cooperation of foreign cities, testify to the pharaonic administration's intention to mark these diplomatic exchanges in stone. The towns, or small kingdoms that offer their tribute to Narmer, do not always do so willingly. The prospect of an Egyptian military intervention also encourages some local entities to negotiate. Oil, wine, and precious wood thus transform into offerings, which can sometimes be seen represented in later Egyptian art, where processions of foreign bearers are depicted bringing jars and trunks of exotic trees. A significant proof of these conflicts and how Narmer perceives them is provided by an emblematic object, the ceremonial mace known as the Narmer Koptos. Discovered in the region of Koptos, located on the east bank of the Nile north of Thebes in present-day Upper Egypt, this mace, in the shape of a stone head, features representations that clearly depict the king's dominance over external enemies. Among the identifiable figures, there are rows of bound Libyans, recognizable by their headdresses and distinctive features according to classical Egyptian iconography. Although ancient Libya is generally located to the west of the delta, the presence of Libyan prisoners on the mace suggests that Narmer aimed to immortalize various frontier victories, or at the very least, illustrate his power over several potentially hostile entities. The Libyans are cited in later sources as adversaries seeking to infiltrate Egyptian territory periodically, particularly in the region of Marmarica, bordering the Mediterranean coast. Representing them bound and defeated thus serves a dual purpose. On one hand, to glorify the pharaoh's power, and on the other, to deter any potential revolts. This practice of celebrating captured enemies through striking images anticipates what, 1,000 years later, will become a classic motif of royal propaganda. In temples and on the walls of tombs, pharaohs will often resort to the same visual rhetoric, displaying the subdued foreigner, symbolizing the re-established order in the face of chaos. The presentation of conquered enemies also refers to the sacred function of royalty. In Egyptian ideology, since the beginnings of pharaonic culture, the king is the guarantor of Maat, the notion of cosmic order and justice. By showcasing his role as victor, Narmer does not merely display brute military power. He asserts that he is capable of restoring universal harmony threatened by the chaotic actions of border peoples. By Narmer's time, this idea was already beginning to take shape and would strengthen under subsequent dynasties. Each expedition to Sinai, each outpost in Nubia, each staged display of defeated Libyans or Canaanites falls into this narrative. The sovereign protects Egypt and makes his people thrive while repelling the supposed disorder emanating from abroad. Moreover, one must not overlook an important aspect of these confrontations and this diplomacy, the repercussions on Egyptian society itself. When caravans bring back Nubian incense, African ebony, turquoise from Sinai, or wood from Lebanon, they contribute to the development of a flourishing local craft industry. Court artisans, already experts in creating cosmetic palettes and gold jewelry, can now work with new materials and innovate into even more refined forms and aesthetics. Statues, amulets, and funerary objects designed for the nobility or for religious ceremonies gain in brilliance, which consolidates the image of a civilization at the forefront of artistic creation. Economically, the discovery and use of strategic crossing points for transporting goods lead to improvements in the administration of territory. The use of scribes develops to account for tributes and manage stocks. High officials are appointed to oversee newly controlled provinces or major trade routes. Thus, the machine of the Egyptian state, still in its infancy, quickly learns to organize itself in a network, linking rural spheres to diplomatic posts and asserting the predominance of the crown over various local or regional leaders. If external conflicts often have the effect of solidifying the king's power in the eyes of his subjects, it remains that diplomacy also plays a crucial role in establishing peaceful links. Through various tacit treaties or trade agreements, Narmer is likely to negotiate access to certain resources in exchange for his blessing or protection. His successes on the battlefield, whether real or staged by iconography, offer a powerful lever, encouraging neighboring territories to rally to the Egyptian cause rather than risk confrontation. On the other hand, these peaceful negotiations allow Egypt to dedicate its energy to other crucial projects, such as developing a centralized administration, strengthening religious cults, or establishing new infrastructures. In this way, diplomacy and conquest complement each other, forming a coherent whole where the demonstration of strength feeds negotiation, and where the signing of trade agreements ensures Narmer's lasting power. For an observer of the time, these external initiatives mark a turning point in Egypt's history. Never had a sovereign combined exploration, mining exploitation, trade, and military reprisals. Narmer goes beyond the unification of Egypt, embodying an international actor ready to defend his territory while relying on garrisons and trade agreements. The stelae and reliefs commemorating the tributes from Canaan, Nubia, and Libya illustrate this ambition to make Egypt a dominant power while opening trade routes. This approach foreshadows the commercial and military relations of the centuries to come. Subsequent dynasties would continue to strengthen ties with Nubia, Libya, and the Syrian-Palestinian coast, consolidating their authority through previous diplomatic precedents. Religious buildings, exceptional craftsmanship, and royal rituals would benefit from exchanges with these regions. By exploring, subjugating, or negotiating, Narmer paves the way for an Egypt that exploits every strategic resource for its influence. At his death, he leaves a unified state and a network of trade links and border outposts, facilitating the rise of the dynasties. His diplomatic and military legacy, well beyond his time, lays the foundation for Egyptian imperial ambition. The final years of Narmer's reign remain shrouded in a historical as well as legendary halo. This is a period when, after solidifying his authority over the entire country, he undertakes preparations for his succession and ensures the continuity of the work he has begun. For an international audience that may not be familiar with Egyptian history, it is important to emphasize that the notion of a stable and enduring monarchy embodied by Narmer would have a lasting influence on more than 3 millennia of pharaonic civilization. Synonymous with a strong central power, this reign crosses a final threshold by carefully organizing the transfer of the crown while nurturing ambitious projects to strengthen internal unity. In the mentalities of the time, ensuring a harmonious succession and preserving the cosmic order, the Mat, was a sacred duty. Thus, in this twilight phase, Narmer decides to highlight his heir, the future king Aha, sometimes referred to as the Fighting Falcon. This nickname illustrates the vigor expected from a pharaonic ruler, a sovereign capable of protecting the country against any threat, whether internal or external. Aha was undoubtedly closely associated with the major religious ceremonies organized in the palace courtyard. Indeed, to prepare a future monarch, care was taken to initiate him into the dominant rituals. He likely participated in daily offerings in the temples of Horus, or in festivals marking the harmony between the sovereign and the deities. Possessing such religious legitimacy was crucial to being accepted by all the elites, whether from the scribal administration, military leaders, or priests. This tradition of initiating the heir into ritual life was not unique to Narmer, but his rigor in training Aha indicates that he wished to avoid any contestation at the time of his death. At the same time, another ambition of Narmer arouses the interest of historians and archaeologists. At the time, land development responded to a dual need: to ensure water regulation for agriculture and to consolidate royal power through large-scale works. Later accounts tell that Narmer envisioned damming part of the annual floods to better irrigate surrounding lands, increase harvests, and thus assert his authority over still poorly structured regions. However, it should be noted that the idea of an early canal to Lake Moeris is partly mythical. Many later sources, dating back to the end of the Old Kingdom or later, tend to exaggerate the achievements of the early kings to render their figures more grandiose. Some steles discovered in the Fayum region, however, suggest that hydraulic works were actually considered or initiated, perhaps under Narmer's impetus. Archaeologists have noted the presence of earthen embankments and rudimentary dikes that could date back to this period, although dating remains tricky. Beyond this grand infrastructure project, Narmer's declining health is reflected in the partially mythologized accounts of his contemporaries. The texts, mostly fragmentary, derived from engraved ivory fragments or cylinder seals, suggest that the king had reached an advanced age for the time, perhaps in his 60s, which was already considered remarkable in a civilization where life expectancy was often shorter. In this context, the royal entourage redoubled efforts to implement all preparations to sanctify the transition of the sovereign into the afterlife. The last months of his life in Thinis, a city located in the Abydos region of Upper Egypt, reflect a particular attention to funerary rites. Thinis was not only a strategically important urban center, it also held a prominent religious position, as the local deity Khentiamentu, associated with the underworld and death, was worshipped there. It is possible that Narmer chose to establish himself there in his final days to ensure that his entire spiritual journey would be honored. When Narmer dies, evidence converges on the city of Thinis as the place of his last breath, although archaeological documentation is far from unanimously conclusive. Later traditions reported by authors from the late period or the Greco-Roman era, however, assert, with a certain lyricism, that the king would have uttered a final oath of loyalty to Horus, imploring the falcon god to perpetuate the prosperity of his lands. Then, the sovereign would have been taken to Abydos, a few kilometers from Thinis, for burial. Abydos, a holy city where the cult of Osiris flourished, was the preferred funerary site for many pre-dynastic kings in the first dynasties. In this sacred city, the sovereign would symbolically resurrect through his union with Osiris, the god of fertility and rebirth. Narmer's tomb, located by archaeologists in the so-called B17, B18 sector of the royal necropolis of el-Ka'ab, near Abydos, consists of two adjacent rectangular chambers, a design that foreshadows the great royal tombs of later epochs. These two funerary chambers were likely constructed of mud bricks, a fragile but standard material at the time, and reinforced with wooden posts. Although excavations revealed that part of the funerary equipment had disappeared, fragments of pottery bearing inscriptions, decorated seals, and a few prestige items remain. According to custom, it is believed that valuable items, such as hard stone vases containing ointments or oils, may have been placed around the royal sarcophagus. The location of these burials near Abydos reflected the desire to affirm the legendary lineage with the chthonic deities, and to perpetuate the royal tradition of the south. The funerals were an occasion for an elaborate ceremony, in line with the Egyptian idea of royal transition. Sacred boats, likely without masts, would have been transported overland from the Nile to the burial site. These boats represented the vessel of the deceased king's soul, tasked with navigating the afterlife, sometimes referred to as the duat. The wooden boats, adorned at the prow with motifs of divine animals, also symbolize the strength and resilience of pharaonic power. Among the offerings, one frequently finds clay or limestone bullheads, evoking fertility and solar power, as well as jars containing wine, beer, or various ointments. Nubian vases, a region located south of the first cataract of the Nile, known for its resources such as ivory or incense, likely formed part of the procession. Their presence, attested by shards found in royal tombs, illustrates the commercial and political ties that Narmer had carefully maintained. In every detail, everything was orchestrated to allow Narmer's spirit, his Ka, to join the revered gods in Egypt without hindrance. Priests would likely recite prayers intended to open the mouth of the deceased and to unleash his capacity to express himself in the afterlife. The ritual offering of dated beer, brewed specifically for the occasion, was also practiced so that the deities might well welcome the former monarch. The highest servants of the court, including scribes and senior officers, would have attended the procession, carrying the standards of the gods and those of royalty. This collective participation underscored the importance of social and religious cohesion at a time when the country risked suddenly becoming fragile, lacking a unified central authority. At the end of these ceremonies, Narmer's embalmed body was lowered into the burial pit, fitted out with precious wood and carefully deposited offerings. Later legends, circulated through oral narratives or transcribed on certain funerary stones, recount a particularly remarkable episode. The precise moment when the deceased was interred, the god Ra, the supreme solar deity, would have made his struck aura heard. According to these accounts, a brief but violent storm would have descended upon the region, accompanied by lightning piercing the sky. For the Egyptians, the electrical force and sudden light were often interpreted as signs of divine intervention. This meteorological phenomenon would have been perceived as Ra's approval, welcoming Narmer among the blessed of the afterlife and confirming the legitimacy of the deceased as an eternal king. Such a manifestation was, of course, idealized in the accounts, as it reaffirmed the almost divine character of royal function and suggested that nature itself honored the great unifier of Egypt. After the funeral, the transition to the new reign was solemn. Aha, son of Narmer, took over, supported by the elite and the symbolic blessing of his father. Inscriptions on ivory tags discovered at Abydos show his accession to power without major contestation. The stability of the kingdom, assured by alliances and effective administration, allowed for a peaceful transition, notable in a time when local rivalries could threaten political balance. The disappearance of Narmer did not provoke a dynastic crisis, proof that he had anticipated succession. His legacy remained alive through Aha and the cult surrounding his tomb. The death of Narmer, probably at Thinis, before being taken to tomb B17-B18 at Abydos, marks the end of a foundational chapter in Egyptian history. The events of his last years show a political ambition, illustrated by a hydraulic project towards Lake Moeris, and an extreme care taken with rituals to ensure his integration into the divine realm. His reign, inscribed in collective memory as linked to celestial will, left Aha as the heir and a well-organized monarchical system. The first dynasty, rooted in this political continuity, allowed for the flourishing of Egyptian national history for millennia. The figure of Narmer persisted as a reference, consolidating the model of the pharaoh king and inspiring pharaohs up to Cleopatra 3,000 years later. After Narmer's disappearance, Dynasty the Fern continued its work of consolidation. Aha, Jer, Jet, and Den succeeded one another, progressively ensuring the kingdom's permanence and the expansion of its borders. Their task was to maintain unity between the two lands and to develop an administrative system still in formation. Egypt, geographically marked by a river corridor linking a marshy delta to a narrow valley surrounded by desert, was a territory to be structured. Aha, probably the son of Narmer, reinforced ties between local chiefdoms. At Abydos, he completed the construction of religious and administrative infrastructures to legitimize the monarchy. The inscriptions found highlight control over resources and luxury goods, thus consolidating the centralized monarchy and the expansion of Egypt. Aha is also said to have founded strategic sites in the Delta to strengthen his power over Lower Egypt. Under the reign of Jer, administrative structures were consolidated, notably with the extension of networks of scribes for tax management. He also continued the worship of Horus and incorporated local deities to strengthen the unity of the kingdom. Expeditions to the south marked the extension of Egyptian influence up to the First Cataract, securing trade routes to Nubia and preparing the ground for territorial expansion. Political stability was based on Ma'at, the guarantor of universal order. Under Jet, administrative measures were strengthened and funerary art expanded, with more elaborate tombs. The will to symbolically connect Upper and Lower Egypt through ceremonies was reinforced, consolidating the idea of the king as the guarantor of cosmic order. Theories suggest that this period favored the organization of provinces, or nomes. Den, the fourth sovereign of Dynasty the Pharaoh, is considered an innovative king. He purportedly reigned long enough to carry out important reforms in the state apparatus and cult practices. Under his reign, expansion to the south reached the First Cataract, strengthening Egyptian control over Nubian territories. Inscriptions on ivory tablets and seals indicate that Den also managed mining resources, such as gold and turquoise, thereby increasing the kingdom's wealth. On the religious front, he strengthened the pharaoh's position as an intermediary between the gods and men, consolidating a lasting pharaonic theology. During his reign, a civil calendar of 365 days was established, allowing for the synchronization of agricultural work with the Nile's floods. This calendar improvement facilitated the organization of harvests and later influenced the Greco-Roman world. The annual flooding of the Nile was crucial for agriculture and the prosperity of the kingdom. In parallel, the First Dynasty strengthened the rivalry between Horus, associated with the royalty of Upper Egypt, and Seth, venerated in the Delta. Reliefs at the Temple of Ombos illustrate Horus's victory over Seth, a symbol of the unity between the south and the north. The king, under the protection of Horus, asserting his legitimacy, also integrated the cult of Seth to appease tensions and strengthen the shared Egyptian identity. After Narmer, a key element was the inscription of the title Narmer's Reef on jars and clay seals, lasting until the Third Dynasty. This shows that the legacy of this unifying sovereign remained deeply rooted in the collective memory. The term reef symbolized the protective strength of the king and his legacy. These jars circulated throughout the kingdom, attesting to the enduring respect for Narmer's royal foundation and serving as an ideological seal, linking the past and the present. Pharaonic symbolism, particularly the two crowns, white for Upper Egypt, red for Lower Egypt, was rooted in the traditions of the First Dynasty. The posture of the king striking an enemy, the smiting pose, reflected sovereign power, emphasizing the sacred function of the pharaoh as the guarantor of divine order.